Make sure you say something funny.
Something funny?
I quit.
Price. Yeah, we can't do this anymore. You're being
Good.
booted. You're being booted from this podcast.
Had a good run.
Not
At,
really.
at least 2 episodes I was on.
You're just like that permanent guest, like Henry on last podcast on the left.
Yeah, I'm always 1 foot out of the podcast.
Yeah.
We've
All
got
right.
too many other opportunities.
Yeah, you know me. Just,
Just-
people are clamoring for my time, and I just don't know
Exactly.
if I can give it all to this podcast.
You gotta like keep your options open just in case.
Yeah.
In case it just becomes necessary to drop this.
Yeah. Start seeing you on the cover of Forbes. All right, we are live. So we are doing another hot takes episode. Pretty self-explanatory. Hubbard, do you want to kick us off with your first hot take?
Okay, which one I think the most straightforward one I had was just AI art is art. Although to elaborate, I think like AI generated images and dialogue and everything else that you could think of in terms of AI generation. Uh, it's more like a tool for art, but the product is still art. And I think that's like the contentious issue I see a lot of the time is like not just artists themselves, but a lot of other people seem to think that the product, any product that is AI produced, can't be art because I think the best way to describe their argument, to steel man it, is that AI lacks intentionality. Like our current, especially like our current generation of AI, as far as I understand it, does lack intentionality. It's just takes a shitload of input and then kind of comes up with what expected output people would want based on that input. So
I
there's not
can
really.
elaborate a bit on the process. The AI, as far as I understand it, is best described as sort of a reinforcement learning algorithm, and it takes an input and it throws it at the wall to see what it makes, and then it compares that back to an existing thing in its data set that had those same inputs. So you need tagged data sets in order to train AI, and then it just does that over and over again, billions of times, until it can make something that is similar to the real thing that's in its data set when given the same prompt.
Yeah, so and there's no sentience there, right? It's just input, and it's just taking input and then checking it against the created output with more inputs and ranking system, like I guess assigned ranking system or value system of how close it is to what it anticipated it should be. And so I do, in that sense, agree that there's no intentionality there, and therefore, like again, I think the argument becomes from the detractors that it can create things that resemble art or have like artistic like qualities, but because there's no intentionality, it's kind of almost tricking you into thinking like hitting on a particular human emotion set, tapping into that without any greater purpose or yeah, like any, I guess purpose would be the thing where like artists, whether intuitively or explicitly, are usually trying to generate some sort of message or evoke some sort of reaction or create some sort of experience for the person. And AI is not doing that. It's just it can create those, but by accident and not on purpose. And that's where I think that's where there is a decent amount of a decent argument that AI art isn't necessarily art in that sense. But that's excluding how it act like that. That's like misunderstanding how AI works and how art will be created with AI. Because I think from everything I've seen with AI art, is it's going to be a back and forth process between the actual person who's creating the art and the AI that's generating the output, where the person will create multiple iterations of a picture using the AI, and they will change it or edit it or regenerate it until they're happy with what they have based on what they want to see and what they want to their intentionality. So that's why I think AI art is definitely art in the same way like taking a picture with your phone, even though you know all you're quote unquote doing is capturing what's already exists out in the world with digital technology. The artist, when they take a photograph, that's still art because there's intentionality behind it, where they're picking what to take a picture of, they're choosing how they want it to be orientated, and the lighting and the exposure and all these different variables in order to create something that they want to see represented. And that's the same with AI. You're generating multiple multiple of the same type of picture. You're picking the one, you're adding to it, and then if you go deeper too, like the stuff that AI is trained on is also art made by people with intentionality. So I think there's plenty enough human input and intentionality in it that any real thing created by the AI art generated process is going to be art by our current definition and our current understanding. And I think people that claim that it's not just don't understand the process, and they're
It's really like they believe AI art is simply coming out of the void, generated by a machine that, in their mindset, wouldn't even be created by humans, because even the aspect of humans choosing the data set gives a sense of intentionality. I know in the AI threads that I've been looking through, it's an enormous aspect of what you can get out of an AI art generator is what data set you put into it. What it is trained on and what it is attempting to make is curated by the humans using it.
That's what I was getting at earlier, is like that. Even at that layer, you're getting human intentionality in it, where even before the first image is generated, there's decisions being made by people about what to train the AI on. And again, like you were saying, I think there is like this huge misunderstanding where like people that aren't in that world literally think that you just buy a supercomputer, and then you hit the dice icon, and then a picture appears, and that's it. That's what happened, and that's not art, or that's not music. That's not that photograph is not. And I think you probably got a lot of the same arguments that these people make when, again, cameras came out, right? Like, and they were comparing it to painting. It's like, well, you're not actually doing art because you're just capturing what's already there with you're just pointing and clicking. Like, how is that art? And I think there's probably hardly a single person remaining, like, that thinks that photography can't be art. Like, I think that's the same way AI is going to go.
It's such a good example, especially because of that change over time as people become more familiar with the technology. For instance, right now, it's still few and far between who can actually run a proper AI art generator on their computer. You need a little bit of tech savvy, and you need quite a bit of hardware to be able to do it properly and have the full experience of generating AI art. But as that the barrier to entry lowers and people get more experience with it, it's going to be similar to photography, I imagine, where people realize it's not the technology that's making it look good. Like when you see a good looking piece of AI art, it's not going to be good because of the AI. It's going to be good because of the human who told the AI what to do. In the same way that a professional photographer isn't good because they have a fancy camera. They're good because they're a professional photographer. And an amateur could go out, take a picture of the same scene, and just end up with something nobody wants to look at.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you really see that. Like, if you just start snapping photos with your iPhone or even like a decent camera, like, I've given that a go, and what I produce is complete bunk comparatively to like what an actual pro does, and like you can just test that yourself. Like,
and
it's
iPhones
pretty
have
obvious.
so many cheats built into the iPhone camera to make it so that amateurs end up with a better result than they should, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the back end with things like AI in order to improve the photos of complete amateurs. And good photographers with iPhones will turn off all of that assistance so that they can capture what they absolutely want to capture in the scene.
Yeah, I think it'll just naturally go down the road where as these technologies become more accessible and people actually have experience using them themselves, that'll turn the tide of opinion, right? Like if you get a hold of the program and you start trying to make stuff and you realize it's a lot harder and it's a lot more of a like iterative process that you have to participate in actively, I think that'll change people's minds pretty quickly. It'll just become apparent that, wow, this actually takes effort and skill to make something worthwhile, even though I have this like incredibly powerful tool. It doesn't just come for free. Still, there's still a lot of creative expression that's baked into what's being generated.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's about all I have for that one, unless you guys have further elaborations.
Not for me. I think you did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, I think that pretty well sums it
And
up.
I certainly agree. Having used the AI, like the actual programs like Stable Diffusion myself, it's, you just type in, like I've typed in a bunch of shit, and, sometimes you get lucky on the first type and it actually pulls up, generates an image that's kind of what I wanted. And then other attempts took a ton of time, like refining them, like 30 plus like reimaginings before I even got something that wouldn't be considered complete garbage. Like, you can just test this thing yourself. You can just go to the Stable Diffusion website and play around with it. Like, it's definitely not the randomize button. All right, Price, you want to kick off yours?
Yeah, this one's probably not going to be too long of a hot take, but I found it interesting recently. I've been reading a bit of news about America and the failure they had for a couple days to elect a Speaker of the House in Congress in America. And if people haven't kept up with that news, basically what happened is the Republicans took control of the House. And that means that they have enough votes to choose who the Speaker of the House will be. And as far as I understand it, the Speaker of the House is a necessary political role in the American political system, such that not having one would grind everything to a standstill. And like, you need to just get it over with. And it's almost always the case that the party that controls the House elects the Speaker on the first vote because everybody's whipped into line. They have roles in the party of party whip in Canada. I'm not certain if they have that in America, but there are basically people who are in charge of making sure everybody goes with the party line. But what happened in America is that sort of a subdivision that exists in American politics underneath the party is the caucus. And they have a caucus that they call the Freedom Caucus that, as far as I can understand, basically decided to flex their muscles and bring themselves to the public attention by not voting for the Speaker of the House that the rest of the Republicans voted for. And given that the Democrats didn't have enough people to vote in a Speaker of the House, that meant that they went 2 days or so without a Speaker of the House, which hasn't happened in a long time. So because of this, a lot of American news outlets are beside themselves. The democracy's broken. This is a disaster. How could something like this happen? It's all a shambles. But I think on a more optimistic perspective, that it's a good thing for people to actually have this publicity around dissent within the American parties, because the Democrats have always had a lot of dissent. Their Progressive Caucus was probably still is the most well-known caucus in American politics. The Freedom Caucus would be moving up there, I'm sure now. But this idea that there are divisions within the party, in an optimistic point of view, might help break some of this sort of monolithic tribalism that's going on in America, where, all Democrats bad, all Republicans good, and the world's black and white. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's Republicans that you don't agree with. And then the next logical step, which hopefully people will take, is that there's Democrats that you do agree with, and that the world isn't black and white. And, maybe there's some nuance to be had around these questions, which is the other potentially beneficial aspect, because I think a lot of people in America have realized there's sort of an establishment, and that there's not a big difference between what the establishment Democrats want and what the establishment Republicans want, in that they're both very often working towards the ideas of big business, and they're not out there for the little guy.
Big business combined with big government. They just want big.
Yeah, well,
that's
that's
like an
the
elite,
interesting
right?
thing. The interesting thing with the Freedom Caucus is one of their core principles is small government, which is not an establishment principle, and it's not a progressive caucus principle. But now there has always been a vocal libertarian candidates in America, but this kind of demonstrates that there are actually enough people that want small government that they can do something if they put their minds to it, even in a symbolic fashion like this, which they eventually caved and elected the Speaker of the House, because obviously it's not in their best interest to force the Republicans they don't agree with to go across the aisle and work with Democrats that they agree with even less. So it was in their best interest to eventually elect the Speaker. But this symbolic gesture that, they have some power in government might sort of wake up some more apathetic Americans who had figured, both sides are the same and nobody's ever looking out for what I want. So I think all in all, I would suspect that it will end up being beneficial for American politics. And I mean, that might be naively hopeful, but it's certainly can't get much worse than the idea of Democrats versus Republicans, or the even worse idea that everyone's all the same and nobody's actually working for any change in the government.
Yeah, I think it's interesting watching how the Democrats reacted, which I think pours a little bit of pessimism on some of your points, because especially like even the progressive caucus on the Democrats basically took it as an opportunity to attack the Republicans. Like, oh, you guys can't even agree on basic stuff together, right? And the progressives were basically piling shit on the Republicans for not, which to me is just, they could have taken it as opportunity to further their own kind of party, their own position within their own party, and used it as an opportunity to kind of say, like, see, the Republicans also have these kind of internal party power struggles where the center of the party doesn't necessarily represent their constituents as well as other wings of the party, and instead they just took it as an opportunity to score bipartisan or partisan points, right? Which is a bit disappointing, because
kind of expected of the progressives, though, as they would be the left wing of the Democrat Party, in the way that the Freedom Caucus is the right wing of the Republican Party.
Although, again, I think like your optimism relies on, this is my opinion, is that for the establishment to be undermined and there to be like some sort of shift towards a different way of doing politics in the US and in other countries, I think the kind of like the farther out wings of the right and left need to realize that they have a lot in common, that and that they are better off actually coordinating on some things, because they'll never get support from the center on any of those things. And I think that's especially true in America, where you actually have parts of the, although I don't think the representatives this is necessarily true of the representatives on the kind of far wings of either party, but the voters on the far wings of either party have a lot in common, ironically.
Yeah, that was one of the things.
Something to change.
I was listening to a socialist on Lex Friedman, and a lot of his points, it's like, man, you also sound like a libertarian in many ways, like you really do. And like it kind of got me thinking, like, I really do think that the people of those more, like, of the further out in the wings for the right and the left, they really need to talk to each other and start to develop a bit of a relationship, because most, like, their goals are very much the same and not in line with the centrists within their parties, that, like, the parties that represent them. And they might disagree on certain things. It's like you definitely agree on more than you think, and quite a bit more than you think. And there's a lot of power to be had between an alliance between them, so long as they can stop, just going after each other. Like, you can actually force some change, because if you had both of those wings combine and, say, like, okay, we'll stop, quibbling about these certain things that we obviously aren't going to disagree on, but these are the main things that we both care about and we both agree with. Let's just push these things through, and together, like, we're going to be able to do that, because now we're kind of the kingmakers. If we both break off from our parties, they're no longer going to have the votes required to do what they want.
I'll just say that's definitely way more optimistic than I was.
No, I'm not saying that is likely. I'm saying that would be the way that they actually can get some shit done. I don't think one of the big problems is, I think there's just, like, there's so much, like, no libertarian person is ever going to want to talk to a socialist. He just wants to think, like, oh, he's an evil fucking communist. It's like, well, like, there are definitely going to be people in that socialist camp who are pretty much psychopathic communists who think, we need...
Eat the rich.
Yeah, eat the rich, bring on the Cultural Revolution in America, like, blah, 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 right? Like, and so I don't see it being very likely that they're going to form an alliance, but it's like, if you want to get some stuff done, the reasonable portions of those wings coming together would actually get some stuff done. But...
Well, I mean, we have to give credit to Marx. I think this is, like, essentially one of his observations that actually was sound, which is, like, class consciousness and class warfare, where there's a lot. Basically, that's what we're describing, is people on the left and right who are, more or less regular people. They share a lot in common because they're from the same class, essentially, or similar classes, and they have very little in common with the technocrats and,
capital
party
owners.
donors. Yeah, and elites on either side of this political spectrum, and, who have a lot more in common with each other than with, their supposed political allies in the on the left or right in the working class. But,
Well,
yeah, so I also don't have a ton of optimism for people working together on these things, because that's been just history.
Well, I'm thinking more of, like, the everyman. If they take us in a certain way, it would demonstrate that, people have different opinions and it's not all black and white in politics. But you can definitely see in the way that it's been presented by the major news outlets that they're all on the establishment payroll, because there is not a single ounce of positivity about it. It's all a disaster. And even the pro-Republican websites that I've seen have all been decrying it as the Republican Party's broken beyond repair, and what's this disaster caused by? And it's like, well, maybe, people should have a representative in Washington that actually works for what they want, even if that's not in line with what the party that representative belongs to wants.
Yeah, and to be honest, I have seen, like, your viewpoint echoed by, I guess, independent journalists would be the best description. And like you were saying, all the quote-unquote establishment, like, outlets and journalists, yes, they seem to be very negative about it. But a lot of independent journalists see it as see it as a good thing, which I think it is. I do agree with you that I think it's good to have something shake up the political system in the U.S. because
Yeah.
it's pretty broken, and anything that kind of highlights that uh, brokenness and opens any opportunity for change is, I would say, a good thing.
Give some people something to believe might actually happen in politics. And maybe next time they won't go with a full overreaction and elect a Donald Trump, but we'll see.
Any more for
Well,
that?
I was just gonna say the last thing for me was just like I could see it like providing a bit of a boost for uh, outside the box candidates, right? Like
Hmm.
it on both sides of the spectrum, right? If which is the one thing you could see is like progressive candidates were kind of non-standard, non-establishment Democratic candidates might get a boost from this as well because people say, "Hey, like if I actually do vote for this person who's not part of the swamp in the primary, they could actually put some gears in or wrenches in the gears in Washington and actually maybe get something to change because there is a way that these non-establishment candidates can gum things up. Like it's actually
Hmm.
possible. Just shows that it's possible to do something if you elect people that aren't completely bought and paid for by the establishment.
I think that pretty much sums up the point I wanted to make there.
All right. Okay, we can move on to my first hot take. So, mine is over the current GPU pricing problems where the big players have priced their GPUs while the only two real players have priced their GPUs like at exorbitant prices. And it kind of revealed something that I was just like something that I was kept noticing. People were saying it's like there seems to be this weird idea that has been generally accepted in certain circles that like things have like a base intrinsic value that should be like general and universal because they'd always bitch like, oh, the GPUs are not worth that, they're worth X. And but yet like a lot of the GPUs would just sell out anyways. It's like, and then you'd see the argument, it's like they're not worth that. And my point is like, okay, there like the hot take basically being like things are valued at what people pay for them, and that is their value. So if a GPU is priced at $2,000 and it sells, it is actually worth $2,000. And there seems to be, for some godforsaken reason, this belief that that's not what it's valued at. Like, it's a weird attitude.
Have you heard the good word of the labor theory of value, my friend? My comrade.
Apparently, that's what they're all operating on. And basically, my hot take is what's just going on in the GPU market. Well, yes, I don't like it as a personal consumer. It's just price discovery, and they're like
Well, I think
it's a normal market function, and it's just got to play out the way it's got to play out. And people sitting around saying that it's like these aren't like they should be valued at $800, not like $1,600. It's like, well, that's not how it works. Like, it just isn't how it works. There's obviously some caveats in the sense that, yes, we only have two GPU makers, and that does
there's a pretty
inflate.
big
There's three
caveat,
now.
and there's one GPU maker, and it's called NVIDIA, and AMD sells like a tiny little baby dick amount of GPUs, and then AMD or Intel made like three GPUs, and they're going to be like museum pieces within the year.
Yeah.
So they don't actually count. So I think like yeah, I just don't agree with the hot take because I would say like it's like a perfect monopoly essentially, and that's like people's point is and that I would say like that's the
But my
argument that you
point is like
get.
if people are buying them at those prices, it's like that is what they are valued at.
That's what happens in a monopoly, and that's what you see. The lowest ever GPU sales in like the last 20 years happened in this last quarter because people aren't buying GPUs.
Yeah,
They're
and
just
I do think that, but there seems to be
so
this.
NVIDIA is maximizing their profit, but they're uh, the market, like the current pricing doesn't actually maximize social utility, because there's just tons of people that are sitting on the sideline who want a new GPU, who would get utility out of a new GPU, but prices are too high for them, so they don't enter the market. So you just have a ton of people who
Yeah, they're
don't
sitting
have
on the sidelines.
GPUs.
Yes, I do agree with that, but I guess the major point there is like people don't like the comments that I kept seeing was like along the lines of like there's a base universal value, and it like it's like a misunderstanding of like market, like the market driven price in general, where it's like they say like no, these should be valued at $800 exactly, and that's what they should be, and they're like there's no other reason for it to be like that. And it just there was a lot of that kind of commentary around, because I value them at X dollars, that's what they should be. And it was like this weird belief that there's a universal applicable value to products, and it's like that's not how a market works. And I 100% agree where it's like, yes, the market is being manipulated through monopolistic forces, but a lot of the commentary I was seeing was this notion that there should be an applicable universal value to things, and there shouldn't like the market forces basically shouldn't apply. And I just think that's like, well, then you remove all of price discovery and all of that, and it was just a weird take that seemed to have a lot of popularity, almost like kind of like, oh, we should have price setting. And my point there is like, you need some form of mechanism of price discovery, and yes, in this case, it might be not a bad idea, because you do have a monopoly basically by NVIDIA, that should be looked at. But because somebody values something does not mean that everybody has to value it at the same amount. And I just think it's like, and it was a very common sentiment that I kept seeing crop up.
Well, I would agree that there is a huge misunderstanding of like how companies price stuff. Like one thing that I see that just drives me nuts is like some people think that for some reason the number one consideration for pricing that a company has is their cost incurred. And I really don't understand that argument. Like, and going back to GPUs, I see that in GPU land all the time, and just generally in electronic land all the time. It's like, well, it cost NVIDIA 20% more to produce this generation of graphics cards than last generation. Therefore, they should only price it 20% more than last generation. It's like companies don't really care that much how much it costs them to make it. They care how much how to maximize their profit. That's the only thing. And cost obviously is one of those considerations in terms of like they're not going to sell something. They're not going to produce a bunch more stuff if they're only going to sell it at a loss. But as long as they're in the profit, then they don't really care that much how much it costs. They just care what number produced and what
they're looking at
leads
margin
to the highest margin. Exactly. It's all about margin. So I would agree that there is like economic
it's much more of a comment on the general ignorance.
The sentiment that where people, I think people feel like when you see monopolistic markets, I think people start to get an intuitive sense that there is something wrong with it in terms of like the price. Say when NVIDIA charges $1,200 for a mid-tier graphics card, and they'll make all sorts of brain dead arguments that are not in line with economics, but it's because their intuition is telling them that something's wrong, and their intuition is right, and they're just allocating the reasoning to the wrong. They're attributing it wrong.
Yeah, and that's more the point of the hot take, is like going after the fundamental misunderstanding of how it works. I do think that with respect to the actual GPU market, yes, clearly something is wrong, and people pointing that out is fine, but it's like you have to point out the right thing, and a misunderstanding is not a misapprehension of how it works is not going to help like fix it.
I agree. Like, yes, I think price fixing would be,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
like
that seemed to be like one of
price,
the
price fixing would be a disaster in the GPU market.
yeah,
And I think
exactly, and that's that. I started to see that kind of crop up, saying like, "Hey, we should, you know, have set prices." It's like, you don't want to go down that route. That's a bad route.
But I do think that a lot of people's like frustration, like high prices, is because they're in a monopolistic market and they're one of the people that is basically being fucked by the monopoly, right? Like that's why you get a lot of people that get really frustrated in monopolistic markets because
Yeah, because you are being you are
they
being
have
fucked.
this, well, they have this like intuitive sense that there's should be a lower price that would make more sense like at a fundamental level, and that's probably because their intuition is like feels the pent up demand that's not being met, and like that's at least that's how I see it. Like I feel like
Hmm.
people like kind of when they participate in a market, they know kind of like how other people are feeling. And when they're in a monopoly where the price is set way too high, they know that there's a bunch of unmet demand, and that just like sets off their alarm bells of like something's wrong here. They don't, maybe they can't articulate it, but they know something's wrong because there's a bunch of unmet demand, which doesn't make sense in a competitive market. Like if it was a
Hmm.
competitive market, there wouldn't be such like this um, crazy amount of unmet demand because there'd be lower pricing and a much higher quantity being sold, and there'd be much fewer people sitting on the sidelines. So I think you also see that because there's the same thing. I see similar kind of bad arguments, but intuition in the car market in the last 2 years with COVID, which was not actually a monopoly or anything, but it was a supply, basically supply
Shortage.
failure. Yeah, due to supply chain failure, and it had a similar effect of jacking up prices to a place where demand wasn't being met, like reasonable demand wasn't being met, and prices were just all out of whack, and people were having making similar crazy arguments, and like, oh well, government should step in and prevent prices from going up, and also not understanding how costs work. Like, oh well, it only costs the company $30,000 to make the car, and they're marking up their MSRPs to 50% higher than they should be, to like 70,000. Like that's not. It's like, yeah, they shockingly they don't care how much it costs to make it. They care how much they can get for it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That's all I had. Price, any comments?
Well,
Or
I'm
you
just
just
not entirely sure if I've been keeping up with the GPU market that well, but my understanding is that right now, if you want to do AI image generation, the advice is if you have an AMD graphics card, just don't. And
yeah,
that you
I
should
have
buy
AMD
NVIDIA.
graphics card, and holy Christ, has it been a huge pain in the ass to try to get it to work.
So I could definitely see this monopolistic aspect of GPUs only getting worse as AI, well, maybe not as, but if AI generation becomes more mainstream and people become more interested in it, because AMD is qualitatively not providing one of the largest sources of current demand for graphics cards, which is the ability to do machine learning.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, although that's only in like the high end market. If you look at like the most popular graphics cards, it's all stuff that wouldn't ever be used in machine learning or AI anyway.
But does that go for sales still?
For like quantity sold,
Like,
yeah.
okay.
Like the high end stuff, like that say over mid tier and up, accounts for like 10%. maybe 15% of the whole GPU market for
Yeah, that's fair.
discrete graphics. 95% of people. Well, I guess to be fair, like you can also segment that by country. Like if you look at rich countries, it's probably a lot higher. But like people forget that like China and Malaysia and Indonesia and stuff, like they're not buying $2,000 graphics cards because that's like a yearly salary.
Yeah.
They're buying cheap shit for $200 or at most. So it just depends. But it's pretty I guess it's complicated. It depends the country and all that stuff. But I think in North America you will definitely see some of that play out where even kind of normal people will be drawn towards Nvidia more and more because
Well,
they
and if
will
you
want to
have,
get in on it.
even if it's only the high-end cards that can be used for the AI art generation, if the demand increases by say 25%, Nvidia could just jack the prices up on those particular cards too. I'd imagine.
Yeah, and it also comes back to like margins and stuff, right? Like the margins are way higher on the high end graphics cards anyway. So most of the profit is in oftentimes most of the profit is in the high end anyway. Like they're doing way lower volumes, but they're making most of their money on that stuff. And I mean that also goes true with like beyond even just consumer, where Nvidia is selling their 4090 equivalent. That's for like commercial. It's $7,000. It's like
Yeah.
7,000. It starts at $7,000, which is like I'm sure their margins on that are like just stupid because it's like more or less the same base silicon cost. Their software support is way better on those things, and they just charge an absolute crazy premium. I guess should I start my second one?
Yeah, I'm done on
Might as
that,
well.
on mine.
So I guess my second one, I don't have as clean way to put it, but basically I think like the most underrated or under discussed element of climate change, sustainability, pollution, all like moving towards solving all these problems is just going to be quality over quantity. Um, like, and what I mean by that is just pick any consumer product that you can think of, and I think moving towards buying less of that product, but of higher quality that lasts longer, is going to be the way of the future for cutting down on environmental impact and all that kind of thing. Because I just thinking about it, like a cheap $10 t-shirt and a much better $25 t-shirt, the one might last 2 or 3 or 4 times longer than the other, but their input costs and their material costs and all that's or their the material input and the electricity, all that stuff is going to be quite similar. And the reason that people buy the cheap one is because just if you look at present value of money and all that kind of thing. And well, to be fair, I think the main reason for a lot of the consumer goods that people buy the cheaper one or tend towards cheapness is the very simple reason that it's like price is the one thing that people can be kind of more or less certain of. A lot of like quality differences and all that stuff is very hard to like quantify and also make a comparison across different products and stuff like that. So most people default to like price as probably the most important factor in terms of buying consumer goods, and therefore companies focus on pricing as like the determinative factor in selling stuff, and then therefore they try to for most things that have a competitive market, they just try to minimize cost. That's like the only real strategy you can go for.
I think I've seen one interesting attempt to do something other than minimize cost, and that's specifically in the outdoor wear market where things are very expensive to begin with. Is there are companies now, and it seems to be becoming a bit more common. I'm not sure if it'll really catch on, but it's basically like $100 premium or something along those lines over their competition, and you'll get a no questions asked lifetime warranty on whatever material you're buying, which is kind of the number one way to say this is good.
Well, I was actually gonna bring up warranty a little later on in my point, but yeah, that's a great way to break into that. Where I think because I think there's a couple things that will push towards quality over quantity just naturally. I think one of them is like a drying up of the cheap labor pool, like worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Like the reason that you could make $10 t-shirts by the millions and millions and millions is because you have unlimited supply of cheap labor in low cost countries like China, Bangladesh, all these things. Those countries are slowly moving up the socioeconomic ladder, and the labor is going to get more expensive. And as labor gets more expensive, it just makes more sense to focus on quality over quantity, because you're going to have your labor cost is going to essentially be fixed at a relatively higher rate, and therefore why waste materials making something cheap when your labor cost is forced to be higher than kind of focus on more quality, and you be more careful with the material input, because the material input starts to become more important, I guess. So I think that'll naturally like just drive up quality. The other thing I think will drive up quality is just like uh, technology allowing for like more uh, comparison, like easier and more consistent comparison between items of similar classes, and being able, and I think you already see that a little bit with some things with the internet. It just becomes easier to like find ratings for stuff, find reviews for stuff, and then actually like move beyond just cost as like the determinative factor of like what you buy, when you can actually get reliable, say, information on quality. And I think as like AI and other things become more sophisticated, it'll be easier to like aggregate that information and then make like a numbers based comparison between, say, t-shirts. You could just like
I
score things like in a qualitative way that boils down to one number for the consumer.
I saw a really interesting project on the internet where a guy. So speaking of AI, there's the GPT model for text-based AI, and you can get access to it as a developer as long as you're vetted, as my understanding. And somebody had taken the GPT-3, which is their latest iteration of the program, and they'd worked it with Reddit such that you would enter a query about a product, and then it would search Reddit to find positive and negative reviews of it, and then you could order those reviews by, or you want to see the most negative or the most positive, because it would score the language in the reviews. And I'm not certain if this was the case, but it would be fairly trivial to implement. It could then theoretically aggregate the reviews and write you a short paragraph on the product, which is only a few steps away from actually being able to sort of assign a number to something. Obviously, there's going to be the problem of the fact that it's based off of individual reports, and there's still not a ton of individual reports on things. People are more likely to talk about great experiences or awful experiences than their mundane experiences. But that sort of program is right up the alley you're talking about, I'd say.
Yeah, that's essentially like, I think it's going to be incremental progress in that direction, where various technologies are going to make it easier and easier and easier to both gather the information, but then also aggregate the information on like stuff like quality and functionality of products. And then you'll just be able to essentially like look up, kind of, hopefully one day be able to like look up a comparison on, say, t-shirts, and it'll kind of come down to a fairly simple scoring system, and then you can just compare to cost and be like, well, what's the best value t-shirt or whatever. And then that actually will just make it, I think once that comes, like once those things start to progress, I think it'll just make it a lot easier for consumers to focus on quality. Because right now, pricing really is the only thing that you can be sure of. You can go on Amazon whatever shit you want to buy, the only number you can really be sure of is the price, because there's so many fake reviews. There's so much like the specifications aren't always helpful. The
Yeah.
the brands are like no like China, like every Chinese company sells like
Xiangshen.
50 different types, brands their products under 50 different brands so that they can avoid responsibility for their products and shit. And then just going back to like the warranty thing, I think that there's going to be like ways that you can encourage, I guess, average quality to increase. And one of them would just be making warranties. You wouldn't even have to require warranties. You could just make rules around like the redeeming your warranty items, make it like standardized and easy. Like you could just say, companies have to provide you like a QR code that you can scan that will register your item warranty when they ship it to you, and then it stays on. You could just legislate it that it has to you have to be able to scan a QR code that registers the item, and that registration stays with you on your app forever. And then if you want to redeem it, all you have to do is send the item in and link the QR code or whatever. Done. And then you don't need to keep receipts for 7 years or whatever garbage. You just make it easier for people to use their warranties, and then companies will actually be incentivized to increase their quality to reduce warranty redemptions, right? Like, yeah, I don't know.
And you can kind of see that on Amazon already, in that it's very straightforward to get a warranty claim on Amazon. And they recently just brought in a big set of guidelines about if a product damages a consumer, and all the payouts, and the fact that the sellers have to have insurance for that.
Right. And I think you could just see that, governments working with business to like make that required, right, across the board. And then
especially the EU.
Yeah, and it like companies will just naturally increase their quality in response to that, because it just will not be worth it to sell the cheapest of the cheap garbage anymore. So all that being said, like I think that will be, I'm hopeful that quality increases, average quality increases, and I think that is like a very underrated and under talked about way that we'll get more sustainable stuff, because so much of like the consumer goods market is like
Disposable
throwaway
garbage.
trash.
Yeah.
Like clothes is a huge one. Like
I was actually going to mention that. It's like that's like fast fashion. It's unbelievably horrible for the environment. Nobody talks about it. It's all about like, gasoline in cars. Well, there's some other problems.
Well, and I was just going to mention that I think like the reason that there's very little talk about like increasing quality of items and moving away from like disposable stuff in terms of like clothes and things. Like, I mean, the one thing they will, governments will talk about is like getting rid of the plastic straws. It's like, Jesus Christ. Like,
Yeah.
Like, that's not the problem. The fucking throwaway fashion industry is the problem. But the reason they won't talk about it is because this is my conspiracy, is that there's just so much money behind fast fashion and disposable consumer goods, because you can make a lot more money selling 10 cheap things than one expensive one.
Well, it's also, from a government perspective, be a terrifying economic shift that you wouldn't know exactly how it was going to shake out, because all these factories making 10,000 disposable shirts will now make 1,000 good quality shirts. Like, you're just going to, the economic model would change on a pretty fundamental level for a lot of industries.
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. I think like government and business is incentivized to ignore this problem, because the disposable model right now makes a lot of money, and moving away from it would be probably costly and difficult, which why not just ban plastic straws instead?
Yeah, it's all very much performative.
Keep it simple.
So that's all I have for that one. I don't know if you guys have.
No, actually, I
That
think you
summed it
guys
up.
covered that well.
On to
Bryce, you're
round
next
2
one.
for me. Now, if I recall what my round 2 is. Oh, yes. So, this is also a rather convoluted statement to make, but basically, I think that there's a significant disconnect between our food culture in the entire world, for the most part, and our lifestyles. And I think that's because lifestyles have changed so much in the last 100 years, and they were relatively stable, probably 4,000 years before the last 100 years. And that food culture developed in that relatively stable 4,000 years. And it's hung on into this unstable and very changed last 100 years. And so, what I mean specifically by food culture, I guess, is the amount and proportions of food that people eat being way too high for the lifestyles that they live. So, like 3 meals a day, for instance, that's great if you're working a moderate labor job. And I mean, it might even be insufficient if you're working a heavy labor job, because you're looking at intaking, say, moderate labor, 3,500 calories a day, heavy labor, 5,000 calories a day. And I am ballparking these numbers, but they're based off of rationing in the Second World War. So a coal miner would get 5,500 calories a day on a ration because that's what he needed to work efficiently. And an average male would get between 3 and 3,500 because that's what the average male was intaking. So, they're ballpark estimates, but that is way higher than what the average male or miner would be intaking now. The average miner is probably running a piece of heavy equipment now. So let's say 2,000 calories a day. Maybe the average male gets a little walking in, little light exercise, maybe 2,500, 3,000 calories a day. And yet we still eat 3 big meals a day. We still have massive feasts with family, which are always good for socializing. But they've been ingrained, that's sort of the cultural aspect, is they've been ingrained into our culture because they need to be they used to be necessary. And now that they're no longer necessary, they hold over and they are not really questioned, let alone replaced. Although there are certainly more people going towards things like 1 meal a day, which is all you need if you're not doing tons of physical activity. And there are people that do tons of physical activity and still get by with 1 meal a day. But definitely, if you're sitting around all day, don't need 3 meals a day. So the point being that my personal experience that led me to this conclusion is getting back into exercising for the first time in 10 years and realizing how much more food you eat when you actually do something. It's crazy. You don't have to go and worry about what you're putting into your mouth because your body's just burning that. It's a furnace. And it's like I have difficulty eating enough food to maintain body weight when I'm actually being active. And when I'm not being active, it's like, oh man, I'm gonna gain a ton of weight real quick.
When I used to work out as a diamond driller, holy shit, could I just eat so many calories and it wasn't enough. Like, I just eating everything, taking everything from the camp's kitchen, stuffing it into my bag because I'd work 12-hour shifts, slinging pipe, and it was just still not enough. I was like, man, I'm eating like, I'm sick of food. I hate it. Like, I'm at like 3,500 calories because you're literally, like, I was handling 100-pound pieces of steel for 12 hours a day. It was brutal work. And now it's like, now I work a fucking desk job and it's like, that 2,000 calories might be a little bit much. But, started working out like 5-6 times a week and doing some heavy duty exercise and with martial arts and whatnot. So now it's like, okay, like I'm back up eating quite a bit again. And it's like, still losing actually about a pound a week now. Which is good because I'm a fat piece of shit, but I completely agree with you. It's like you do not need to eat much.
This revelation, particularly about bread, it's like if you're eating 3,500 calories a day, yeah, you can crush that loaf of bread. If you're eating 2,000 calories a day, it's like, oh man, a slice of bread? Yikes.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I did is I cut out grains in general because it was just not being that active and cutting out the grains. Like I just started dropping weight immediately. Like it was nuts.
Yeah.
I've done that a couple of
Also,
times
it's
and
like
it's crazy. Like you just cut out the grains and you can start losing weight so fast.
And inversely, when you go back and you need to eat more because you start exercising, it's like maybe you should add some grains in,
Yeah, I'm gonna stay away from them myself, but it's like like if you really want to add some mass, like that's a great way of doing it. Or just
Yeah,
like keep up with your caloric expenditure. That's a really good way to do it.
even like not doing a ton of physical activity, just like exercising like reasonable amount per week. I find like I basically don't have to think about what I eat.
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have like I never had like, well, I guess in university maybe I had a bad diet, but like I never had a terrible diet before that. But like exercising, you don't like need to care that much about what you eat. You can have like a extra serving of carbohydrates. You can like whatever and stay relatively reasonable weight. It's like when you're not exercising though, it's like yeah, all those decisions become like important if you don't want to get super fat.
And with that one, I believe it's about 56% of Canadians don't get 2 hours of exercise a week. And 2 hours of exercise, including walking. Like, it's unbelievable how inactive Canadians are.
Yeah. And
People
what?
kind of question all this stuff, like, oh, why is everybody fat now? And it's like, well, maybe just look at how many calories they burn.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I've also like live in a city where I'm always walking too, which you don't think about that much when you're, but that can add up to like a ton of extra calories burned per week compared to like people that drive pretty much
Yeah.
everywhere. Like if you're going, honestly, I probably like do like a reasonably long walk 3 or 4 times a week just for like grocery shopping and going to like the store or whatever because I don't have a car. And there you go. Like that's more exercise than probably a lot of people get in any week. And then I do actual exercise on top of that. And yeah, I don't know. I've never really thought that hard about what I eat.
It makes such a big difference. Like, and one of the craziest things is just like how little attention is paid to it by the health authorities. It's just, especially
What's
with
it called?
COVID.
Can Active. They tried to get something going to make Canadians more active, and I heard that they were trying to do that, and then I never heard them accomplish anything or be involved in anything that I've seen in my life.
Well, like there was a coalition of doctors in Canada that was basically pushing the notion. It's like, being overweight and inactive is only a problem if the patient says it's a problem. It's like, that is fucking madness. But that's kind of,
Yikes.
yeah, it's like that new fad turning up in the Canadian medical system is like, hey, be a fat piece of shit. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's mean to say otherwise. It's like, no, that's not how medicine works. Like, that's not how bodies work. Like I was listening to Andrew Huberman. He runs the Huberman podcast, which is probably one of the best medical / like health related podcasts in the world, if not the best. And one of his guests was saying, like, you need 45 minutes of activity a day, basically. It's not negotiable if you want to be healthy.
Well, and probably just moderate activity too.
Yeah, it wasn't like you have to
Or
do
something
45
like that.
minutes of insane high intensity. You're going to pass out at the, halfway through it type thing. This is not everybody's David Goggins, but it was like you need 45 minutes to an hour of pretty decent activity level. Doesn't, a brisk walk will do it. But if you're not getting that, you are going to be in deep trouble later in life because your body just requires it. It's not a negotiable thing.
I think one of the most interesting anecdotes that I recalled thinking of on this topic was that in the 1800s in America, they had fat clubs. And to join, you had to weigh over 200 pounds. And these fat clubs were very exclusive to be a member in the fat club because
Did Taft run one?
It was a difficult task in the 1800s to be over 200 pounds. And now, and even throughout the 1800s, as the decades went on and, people got wealthier, lazier, ride carriages instead of horses, these fat clubs kept raising the bar until it was like, you have to be over 240 to join the fat club now. But imagine this day and age. Anyone could be over 200 pounds if they just stop paying attention to what they eat for a year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 200 pounds is just laughable now.
Yeah, it's like that's nothing. But throughout human history, it's just the world used to run on calories. The way that it now runs on oil is kind of the way I frame it. And you had to feed people to get work done. And now you feed machines to get work done. But we still eat like we're being fed to get work done in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
About all I had to say, I think.
Oh, yeah, I don't have anything else to chime in with. All right, I guess we can move over to my last one. And mine is, it is actually the dog breed that's dangerous, not the owners, though it can also be the owners. I see this comment quite a bit where, all dogs are good. Like, there's nothing wrong with, like, a particular type of breed. It's, it's just the way that the owners train them, and that's the, it's all environment, nothing to do with genetics. And that's complete horseshit, in my opinion. Like, if you look at dog attack statistics, pit bulls are responsible for 66% of fatal attacks in the States, and they make up 6.5% of the dogs in total. And, like, it's just obvious if you go to any breeding website or any website about dogs that they have different temperaments. And they were bred to have certain temperaments. And, like, to me, it's just the whole argument that it's only the owners. Now, obviously, there could be some, like, a confounding variable in the sense that maybe certain types of people do pick the more dangerous dogs for particular purposes, which I actually do think is probably somewhat true. But the notion that there's not anything to do with genetics in terms of the temperament for the dog is just absurd to me. And I think, like, some places have straight up banned pit bulls just because of their, like, attack rates, and I actually don't disagree with that whatsoever. Like, Ontario, I think, is the one province in Canada that's banned them, and there's, I think, a couple states that have banned them as well. There might even be a couple countries that have banned them. But I just think it's a ludicrous comment to say that it's like they're, it's only the owners and the type of owners and the bad training and whatnot. It's like, no, like, that's, I think, just not true.
It has to be a comment made by people who have limited to no experience with dogs, because dogs are pretty much the most demonstrable genetically determined entities you'll ever interact with. You get a shepherd dog, has never seen sheep before in his life, and you introduce it to a couple sheep, it's going to try and herd those sheep. Like, it's not even a question. You get a hunting dog and you shoot a grouse or any other flying animal, it's going to go retrieve that and drop it at your feet, even though you never trained it to. Like, dogs are a fascinating study in the ability to train a breed for certain behaviors.
You mean breed a breed for certain behaviors, not train them? Or you mean training in the actual, like, putting the training in, like, breeding them until they have a genetic propensity to do things?
Well, you get the variation in the breed. Obviously, you select the right dog for what you want it to do, and then you train it, and then you train its offspring, and then so, like, there's a question there of like, how you're selecting the genetics and epigenetics, I'm sure, but like the end result that we now encounter on a regular basis of all these different dog breeds is very specialized.
But I think just like there's a couple things that demonstrate the the breed argument. One is like there's many such cases of owners that are like every single metric they're good owners and they take care of their dogs really well and they like treat them very well, train them well and stuff, and then the dog goes psycho and kills someone or kills them, and it's always pit bulls. It's just
Yeah.
like it's like I've not ever maybe there's one or two ever, but I've like never seen a story of like great owners that were like super awesome and then their golden retriever ate their face.
The only
Like,
thing I could imagine is maybe with rabies, but that's the only
Yeah.
possible way.
like I've never seen like, oh yeah, like we raised this dog from a pup and it was like a super good dog and then my golden just fucking killed my family. So, like
Ate my baby.
yeah, it never happens. So it's like, okay, well, but you see that with pit bulls all the time. Like there's probably like a story a month in the US.
There was one in October of 2022. Family dogs killed, I think it was, 2 children and nearly killed the mother. They're just like random family dogs. Like these were not, they don't
not
look like they
neglected,
were
weren't
not
dog
from
fought.
some like hellhole ridden place where they're being violently beaten all the time.
Well, you see it like literally like probably one story a month in the US of like owners who by all accounts are like great owners, treated their dogs great, fed them, cared for them, and then the pit bull is like, okay, I'm gonna kill you now, and eats them. And so that's like the one thing is like, why would you want to breed that like could just do that? I don't know. And then the other thing is like, if you ever just like watch dog attacks, pit bulls are on a different level of like stopping them. Like there's tons of videos of pit bulls being shot multiple times and still attacking, being bashed with things like choked. I saw one that got was going after a buffalo and got kicked into next Sunday by the buffalo and then ran back to attack the buffalo again and before it got stomped on. It's like pit bulls just don't stop. Like they don't have an off switch once they attack. And so it's just like, I don't know, that it's crazy that they're not responsive to like getting violently beat on when they're doing the attacking and still won't stop. And I just don't see an argument for keeping a dog like that, a dog breed like that around. It just seems,
Well, like I'm just like Googling, like
Think of the poor dog fighters who wouldn't have access to their pit bulls.
I know,
Yeah.
but I was like just a simple Google search of like pit bull kills owner, and it's like a bunch of them come up where it's like some lady sleeping with her dog that she was really nice with, and just woke up to the dog ripping her arm off.
yeah, that's basically like I
They're
said,
fucking
you can find
nuts.
a story of that literally once a month, and there's some like speculation. I don't think there's like research, but that pit bulls have like some degree of like propensity to neurodegeneration in their older age, and then they just lose like they basically get Alzheimer's, and then they go pop off and attack things randomly because they forget. Like
I've also heard that theory because, I mean, humans can have a similar result with dementia, depending on what part of the brain is damaged.
yeah, so I don't think that's been I've never seen like a scientific study, but I've seen that proposed several times and it makes sense because it's like their nature is very violent, and if they started to get neurodegeneration where they had their training side of the brain or their familiarity side of the brain, their memories started to degrade, then they're going to revert to instinct, and their instinct is to prey drive and rip things to shreds. So I don't know. I just personally, I would never allow a pit bull around my family.
Yeah,
or
me neither.
my dog or
Absolutely not.
anything. And I just no interest in ever being near or around pit bulls. And
They have been banned in tons of countries. Like I'm looking at the list, they're banned all over the place. Like a lot of a lot of countries, governments have recognized like how dangerous the dogs are. And I think the whole notion that it's like, well, it's just the owner. It's like that is obviously untrue, but people staunchly defend them. It's like just wait until in the middle of the night your dog starts eating your arm, and then you'll find out.
well,
I
and
mean, when they say it's just the owner, another really common breed for bad owners is German Shepherds. How many times do you hear about German Shepherds going off the wall and eating babies?
Yeah, you just never hear almost.
They're actively chosen as guard dogs for drug dealers and other criminals because they're great guard dogs and they're vicious and they'll kill people, but they don't fly off the handle and kill their owners.
Well, and I think again, like that argument of it's the owners that only really like lends itself to like training and temperament, or I guess, or whatever. It doesn't matter for capability, and that's the second strike against pit bulls, that no amount of owner training or owner whatever you want can make up for the capability of pit bulls, and the capability of pit bulls to rip things apart is second to none for dogs.
Oh yeah, like the next most dangerous dog, according to stats in the States, are Rottweilers, and they only account for 10.4. This is 2005 to 2017 data. They only account for 10.4 of all fatal attacks, and then the next most dangerous is German Shepherds, and they're 4.6. And Shepherds are going to be way more common than, because they're
yeah, well, they're very common.
Yeah, they're a much more common dog,
because they're so well, they're one of the most trainable dog breeds.
Yeah, and exactly.
The
Special
police forces and
special forces, tons of them use them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like you can train the dog to be as properly tempered as you want, but that doesn't change their fundamental capability of violence. For Chihuahuas, right? Chihuahuas are a notoriously bad tempered dog, and there's an argument to be made that they're quite violent and
but they're no bigger than a rat.
Their capability to inflict damage is minimal, so it's we don't ban them because it doesn't matter if they go psycho. A 2-year-old can fight a Chihuahua off. So I like that. That's the big in my mind, the undeniable mark against pit bulls is not necessarily even their temperament; it's their capability.
Yeah, they have insane bite strength.
You can't deny their ability to inflict damage. It's not arguable. We know that they can inflict damage, whether or not regardless of whether or not they're more likely than other dogs to choose to inflict damage.
Yeah, but other dogs can.
Pit bulls are unique in their ability to attack and sustain through. The biggest argument against pit bulls in terms of their capability is their ability to shrug damage off and keep going attacking.
Yeah,
because they're breeding as a fighter dog. They have super thick skulls, and they go into crazy overdrive, and they will not stop attacking even if they're dealt a huge amount of physical pain and damage, where other dogs they aren't bred like that, so they're physically not capable of sustaining the same type of attack that a pit bull is. It's not in their repertoire. Even German Shepherds, they just don't have it in them to do what pit bulls can do. They're not physically capable of it.
Yeah, that's all I had. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add, but
Fuck pit bulls.
Yeah,
I think it pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, well, if that's it, then